Hello and welcome back to some more reveals for the Great Dark Beyond. Today we have Warlock, and actually unlike some of the other classes we've seen so far, we've had a little bit of a sneak peek of what Warlock was going to get. We'd already been shown in the first initial reveals, Black Hole, Archimond, and Foreboding Flame, which all implied that we were going to get a demon package for Warlock, and the package was going to be based around you adding demons to your hand or deck that didn't start there. And there'll be some sort of big payoff for doing that, Archimond being one of them. Alright, let's have a look at some of the other support for this demon package then. We have Infernal Stratagem. 3 mana Fel Spell, give a minion +3/+3. If it's a demon, your next one costs 2 less. One thing to bear in mind on cards like this, just in case you're not fully aware of or appreciate how this goes. Kind of like what I said in the last part, where weapons, the more and more stats you get on the weapons, the exponentially more expensive they get, because if you imagine like a 2/2 weapon, for example, that's going to do at max 4 damage. If you have a 3/3 weapon, it's going to do 9. 4/4 does 16, you get the deal. Admittedly spread over more turns, but that is going to be the case. In a somewhat similar sense, if you can give a minion on the board that has lived, from the turn before, a set of stats on the board that you can board with on the board, it effectively turns this card into a minion with charge, so to speak. So giving something +3/+3 on the board is giving it charge. So typically, as you get more and more stats, the cards get more prohibitively expensive. And in fact, it gets to the point where I don't think Hearthstone's ever printed give a card, maybe they have, give a card +5/+5 or +6/+6 on a spell. Because that would be really threatening in certain decks. And because of, by that proxy, if they ever did that, it wouldn't just be a 6 mana give a minion +6/+6. It would be some other condition on top of that. It'd be more than 10 mana type effect. As I said, because it's effectively charge. So, we have seen give minions +3/+3 in the past. They're normally around 2 mana cost, so Demon Fuse is probably one of the classic ones, which was in Warlock, funnily enough. And even as a Demon Flave, that used to be give a demon +3/+3. And actually did see a little bit of play back in the past. Rampage in Warrior was a damage minion, you give it +3/+3. Again, this has seen a little bit of play on the old ladder. If they don't have a specific effect on it, so, it narrows the card down to a specific pool of minions that it can hit. The opposite way of dealing with this is to put a negative effect on it, because clearly 2 mana 3/3 is too strong. 3 mana 3/3 maybe is a little bit too weak. So, for example, we have Cursed Souvenir in Warlock right now, that instead of having a specific category that it can target, instead there's a downside to it. And I say a downside because Warlock are a little bit of a sick fuck of a class. They actually quite like the downside of Cursed Souvenir, which is why it's seeing some play right now in Pain Warlock. You take 3 damage at the start of each turn. That minion that has been buffed with the 3/3 stays on the board. Jam Session doesn't really see any play, but it's actually quite important to compare with the Infernal Stratagem, actually, which is why I've included it on here. Because the way that this card is worked is that you get the +3/+3, and actually you do 1 damage to all of the minions up front. You get it immediately, that big power spike, but you have to pay interest on you overspending on an earlier turn via Overload. Obviously, I say obviously, 3 mana +3/+3 on a minion probably wouldn't see play in Standard. I think it's just too fair of an effect. It sort of sits somewhere in this awkward range of it's probably about a 2.5 mana-ish effect, and obviously they're not going to print a 2.5 mana card. However, unlike Jam Session where you pay for it later, Infernal Stratagem, you sort of pay up front the pain, and then you get a reward down the line instead. So, sure, you spend 3 mana giving a minion +3/+3, but as long as you hit the demon, you're getting a 2 mana rebate down the line. And that's pretty good, honestly, right? That's pretty good. Okay. If this is going to work well, we do have another comparison card we can do to this. And I'm going to get into something to do with the timing of cards. Umpire's Grasp fairly recently was an extremely key card in Window Shopper Demon Hunter. So key that the win rate was basically equivalent to the percentage chance you had to draw Umpire's Grasp with a tutor in the deck before turn 4, I think it was. And if you could do that, the win rate was insanely high. And if you couldn't, you basically lost the game. Part of the reason this was so strong was that Umpire's Grasp, which again, funnily enough, gave a demon a 2 mana reduction, meant the timing of playing Window Shopper was perfect. You could reduce a Window Shopper down, I think, onto 4 mana, and play the Window Shopper on 4, the turn after the weapon. And that's really, really important, because if you can curve beautifully and perfectly, typically good things are going to happen to you. So, the dream for Infernal Stratagem, you play on 3, you hit a demon that you've played on 2, and then you discount a 6-drop demon, right? And you play it on 4. It's going to have more stats than a normal 4-drop. It's going to be a big power swing for you, right? Surely Warlock has a lovely 6-drop, and by my like sarcastic, smug tone, there are no 6-drops available to Warlock as a demon. The closest they have actually got is Eridar Brute, which is a 7-drop, but it can be reduced by opponents' minions being on the board. And let's be real, there's a decent chance that if you're playing like some minion-based combat, your opponent's probably going to have at least 1 minion after you've played your Infernal Stratagem, in which case you could play an Eridar Brute on 4 for effectively a 4 mana 5/6 taunt lifesteal demon. Do I think that's unfair enough? Actually, I don't think it is unfair enough. I think it's a pretty low roll if that's the scenario you get. There are some other demons out there. Kil'jaeden, for example, and his name is going to crop up a lot because I think he's going to go into some Warlock decks. I've seen a lot of people talking about this card, and I think it's actually a very complex card. More complex than people are giving it credit for. Some people I've seen are speculating, like, you want to play your Infernal Stratagem on a demon so that you can play Kil'jaeden 2 turns sooner, you can play it on 5 instead, which means that the secondary effect of the card, where the demons get stronger and stronger as they come through the portal, gets better faster. It's sort of, and I kind of see the idea of this, if you're playing a Kil'jaeden deck against a Kil'jaeden deck, you sort of want to get your Kil'jaeden up first, because if you don't, you're always going to be playing that, like, tempo behind your opponent, because they will be getting +X demons stronger than the demons you're getting on average. I do think that if you're in some sort of, if you're in a, okay, it's so complicated. I think this card, Kil'jaeden, we're just going to talk about Kil'jaeden today, if you don't mind. The Warlock cards, don't worry about them. We'll talk about Kil'jaeden. Kil'jaeden, I think, will actually go into aggro decks as a potential, like, top-end finisher type card. So you'll vomit out all of your value, and then you'll play your Kil'jaeden, and that will extend the game out and give you a possibility of winning the game, where otherwise aggro decks couldn't win the game after, to get beyond turn 7 or 8. If you're in an aggro v aggro tempo-y matchup, do you want to be rushing your Kil'jaeden versus your opponent aggro deck? You might not want to, actually. You might want to just always be taking the most tempo-oriented play and try and gain control of the board, because if you have control of the board in the aggro v aggro matchup, you normally are onto a winner. If you are aggro v controlled, you want to be racing your Kil'jaeden out, probably not again. You don't desperately need to race it out. You want to get your most tempo-oriented cards out as fast as is humanly possible. Now, if you're playing a control deck and you put Kil'jaeden in your deck so that you can extend the deck out against other control decks, if you're going up against aggro, do you want to put Kil'jaeden on the board on 7? You probably don't. You probably want to use all the control cards you put into your deck to deal that pesky flies of aggro decks. In which case, you could play Kil'jaeden a bit later. Honestly, Kil'jaeden probably won't matter in that matchup, but it's just like a final nail in the coffin of one of those decks. If you're in a control v control matchup, do you want to play Kil'jaeden early or late? You actually maybe want to play this a bit earlier, as it will get to a situation then where you're getting more value from your cards per turn. And when you get into control v control matchups, it's typically the most cheaty person wins the game. And what is more cheating than having these ginormous demons? So I think it really depends on whether or not you want to discount your Kil'jaeden or not based on the deck you put it in and the deck you're going up against. I don't think it's as simple as, like, you will definitely use Infernal Stratagem because you definitely want to play Kil'jaeden on 5. I don't think that is quite a close I don't think that quite works out like that. I will say, Kil'jaeden reminds me of this meme of, I guess we're doing, what now? I think we're going to see a lot of decks actually just full stop, but a lot of Warlock decks in particular, where it's like, oh, it's turn 7, I guess we're doing demons now, and you're just going to turn on the demon production factory, and you're just going to start getting some random demons. In terms of other things you might want to discount, by the way, you could hit Wretched Queen, which is a card that's seeing absolutely no play right now. Would it see play at 6 mana? Yeah, it probably would see some play at 6 mana. It's got a lot of stats in it. It's just a little bit too fair on 8. Also very susceptible to getting poofed or stolen, funnily enough. Sagarius is also a really nice card. If you can cheat that out on 7, it's obviously a pretty big thing. Why have 1 portal when 2 portals? That is the question of the day. So if you can get both the Kil'jaeden and Sargeras up and just be the Portal Lord, that's a pretty obnoxious state to be in. As long as you can stabilize through doing all of this, you're on to a pretty good result. Now, I will say I've put on Archimond here, but realistically, you're probably not going to want to play Archimond on 5, as you will be wanting to play demons that didn't start in your deck through the course of the game. That being said, there are probably some very niche scenarios where you might want to use Archimond on curve, even on 5. If, let's say, you generate a demon that didn't start in your deck, and you play it on 2, and you play another one on 4, you might be in an aggro matchup, in which case you might just want to dump Archimond into the board to tempo out the other 2 demons, to give you something to fight with. It probably doesn't matter, but maybe sometimes you will want to Infernal Stratagem into your Archimond. Who knows? In terms of other cards to... Sorry. In other words, you know what, YouTube? Let me just pause you for a second while I sort out my throat. Alright, apologies, YouTube. I had a little bit of tickle in my throat, but that has been sorted now. Anyway, back to what we were getting to. In terms of other cards that generate demons that didn't start in your deck, we have Abduction Ray. 2-mana shadow spell. Get a random demon, reduce its cost by 2, repeatable this turn. Interesting card. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Face Collector and Pickpocket, the Echo cards from Rogue back in the around the Witchwood. I don't think either of these cards particularly saw any play. A lot of people were really, really excited by Face Collector since it could generate you tons of legendary cards, and you could play Value Rogue. But back, when was Witchwood? Was it like 20? Oh god, 2016 is Witchwood, or 2017, there or thereabouts. Back then, everyone dreamed of Value Rogue working. They still dream of Value Rogue working, and it still hasn't really come to a great fruition. There have been some pretty value-orientated Rogue decks, though, that have worked. Either way, just generating random cards, even if they are legendary minions, isn't particularly a great deal. Now, what I will say is, Abduction Ray doesn't just generate you a random demon, it is reducing the cost by 2, and the spell itself costs 2. So in some sort of twisted world, you could almost argue that this is like a 0-mana spell. It isn't quite that deal, obviously, because you are paying 2 mana each turn, which means you can only play Abduction Ray 5 times during the course of a turn. And there's no guarantee that you can play the demons that come from this on the turn you play the Ray. And actually, sometimes you will hit demons that are 1-drops. There are a few 1-drop demons in Hearthstone. So I think on paper, the card is actually closer to something like Primordial Glyph. Now, Primordial Glyph did see some play, and actually some play recently in Casino Mage decks. But the main reason this card saw play was as a means to cast multiple spells during the course of the turn, rather than for its effect. And this is a sneak peek to what I think is going to be the power of Abduction Ray, and it's going to be with a card we're going to see in a moment. Abduction Ray really gets more value if you have a payoff for playing multiple spells per turn. In terms of the demons, by the way, you do get random demons, so you can actually hit stuff not in the Warlock pool, in which case you could high roll things like Window Shopper, which would be a really good additional value addition. And also, by the way, if you get the 2 cost reduction on the Window Shopper, then you get the discovered demon with stats equal to the cost of the minion of the Window Shopper, which is 2 less, so you sort of pass that reduction down to the future. You can hit something like Magtheron as well, which doesn't actually see any play right now, but maybe it would have seen some play at 6 mana. And Spirit Peddler would be a really, really solid card to hit if you're playing this very tempo Hearthstone demon deck with a decent chunk of minions in it. You might want to Spirit Peddler one of your big boys. You'll hit your Archimond, turn it into a 1-mana minion. Fantastic, chef kiss. But again, because of the nature of random demons, you could hit Eye of the Shadow. I actually don't know if Eye of the Shadow with Warlock, if you push the button, I assume you don't take damage, or you'll take 2 damage and then lifesteal it back again. I'm actually not sure exactly how that works with Eye of the Shadow, but we'll find out at some point, because almost certainly if you play this random demon Abduction Ray, you're going to hit Eye of Shadow at some point. You can also hit Employee of the Month, you can also hit Doom Maiden. That being said, with the 2-mana reduction, you're never going to be that upset to play 0-mana 2/3, 0-mana 3/2, give a minion lifesteal, or 2-mana 4/4, look at the top card of your opponent's deck, maybe steal it even. So I actually quite like this Abduction Ray. The big downside, obviously, is that on the turn you're playing these Rays, is a huge tempo loss if you don't play anything with it. So you kind of want a mix and match between very good value cards and cards that you can play on the turn you play at the Abduction Ray. So I think if we didn't see the other card coming forwards, it certainly wouldn't see any play. But perhaps this is the big deal for that card. Kiara the Dark Star, 3 mana 3/3 legendary minion, spell burst. Steal 2 health from a random enemy. Shadow spells don't remove the spell burst. Wow, this card sucks. This card is really bad. It's effectively the return of the Azurite Snake by some means. The Azurite Snake is the reward for excavating 4 times from Showdown in the Badlands. And this deck, fully enough, got nerfed, and specifically Azurite Snake got nerfed, even though the deck wasn't very good, but it was mainly because the playstyle of the deck felt horrible to play against. So they nerfed the Azurite Snake. It used to steal 10 health, now it does 7 health, which means that you have to play more snakes, or actually more realistically bounce the snakes back more times to OTK your opponent. And it got to the point where it's prohibitively too expensive to do that without dying in the process. So Excavate Warlock has basically not been a thing since the second day of Showdown in the Badlands, which is a bit unfortunate for any Excavate Warlock enjoyers. Kiara the Dark Star, you need to play 4 shadow spells on the turn you play Kiara to get an effect better than the Azurite Snake. And you might even argue that it's not better because it's a random enemy, it's not just straight to your opponent's face. So this thing might just machine gun down random enemy minions and maybe doesn't kill anything. Now, I will say that you're getting the health on the minion rather than your own face. There's positives and negatives about that. The obvious positive in this case is that you want the minion to live. So if you do that, you do turn this into a 3/11. Actually, one of the best ways of doing this, of course, is using Abduction Ray. You play Kiara the Dark Star. That lets you cast 3 Abduction Rays on that turn. It gives you steal 6 health from random enemies, split as 2s. That turns your Kiara into a 3/9, and there's a decent chance it lives on the board till the next turn. And also, in the process of this, you might be able to throw out some demons from the Abduction Ray as well. Do I think that's good? I'm not sure, because it's not as easy to say, you know, this turns into a 3 mana 3/11 or a 3 mana 3/9, because you've still spent the mana. It's effectively saying I paid 9 mana for a 3/9, which isn't a great deal. Now, I do appreciate you do get the Abduction Ray effect on top of it, but I'm not convinced the Abduction Ray effect on its own right is that good enough. So you sort of like, you're combining 2 cards that aren't good in separate and just trying to ask the question of together, are they good enough? And I don't know if they are quite good enough together. I'd also like to point out, clearly since this is meant to work with Abduction Ray, because it's like the only thing that is like a repeatable spell in Warlock, and that Abduction Ray says Demon on it, I kind of think the intention is that Kiara would go into the Demon package. It is not a demon, by the way, but is intended to go into that deck. Shadow spells in that package. You're probably going to put Demonic Studies in your deck. That is 1 mana, discover a demon, reduce it by 1. Fantastic. Good for spell burst, is a cheap spell. Round of applause. You might want to put Monstrous Form in that deck. If you're going to run it as a minion-based deck, and you're trying to do like some sort of zoo-orientated stuff, giving +3/+3 temporary, maybe not the worst thing you can do. Also, 1 mana shadow spell. Really good spell burst target as well. Here's where things get a little bit wrinkly, though. You're probably going to put Demonic Dynamics in the deck. You're probably going to put Infernal Stratagem in the deck. They are fel spells. They will spell burst Kiara, but they will break the spell burst on it afterwards, so you won't get more of the stealing effect. So I'm actually not completely convinced Kiara will go into this demon deck. To be honest with you, I don't think it's going to go into any deck, but we'll continue on that path line in a moment. By the way, in case you're wondering, this is all of the shadow spells that Warlock has to offer. This is from 1 to 3 mana that we'll deal with first. I do want to go into detail on each and every single spell out there, but just bear in mind that it gets harder and harder to do the spell bursting side of the effect if you're spending more mana on the shadow spells that you're spell bursting with. You really want to be hitting as many 1-drop shadow spells as possible. Curse of Flesh is hot trash. That probably isn't going to see any play because there's a decent chance you'll lose the game if you cast it, which means you're really asking for Demonic Studies, Monstrous Form, Mortal Coil, Spirit Bomb to hard carry Kiara. Would you put all of those cards into the same deck as Kiara? I'm not actually sure. I mean, I think this minion-based demon deck, you wouldn't do that. But if you're going to try and set this up as some sort of more combo value-orientated deck, maybe you put Mortal Coil in that deck. Maybe Spirit Bomb even makes it into that list. But I'm just not seeing it. And also just worth noting, in terms of the other spells, You're almost certainly not going to put Defile in the deck with Kiara, because Defile, or you're not going to cast it at the least, because Defile might kill Kiara in the process. You're not going to put Announce Darkness in your deck because you like winning Hearthstone games. Curse Campaign is pretty bad. Encroaching Insanity is probably not going to see any play because the Fatigue cards are mainly Fel spells with the exception of that one. So you're actually on a pretty finite pool of spells I think you would put into a deck with Kiara. And there's just not a lot of them that combo with it particularly nicely. When you get to bigger spells, again, you're getting to the point where it's fewer spells that you can cast to Spellburst Kiara. You could hit Dark Alley Pact if you're a bit more of a control deck. You're probably not going to do Fine Print either, because you're going to kill Kiara, because the Spellburst happens after the spell happens, so it will die. Spellstone is pretty weak right now, and so is Siphon Soul, both pretty weak. You're almost certainly not going to play Dirge with this because you don't want to cheat the demons out, because the demons all have good battle cries right now. And then you can't do it with Black Hole, Twisting Nether, or Wheel of Death. So basically speaking, I just don't see why this card exists right now. It feels like it's so out of place compared to the other cards in the Warlock package. Really, really weird. And honestly, stealing 2 health from random enemy on a spell burst, that's a really, really weak effect, no? Alright, let me tell you how it's going to break the game, though. And actually, what I think that we were worried about, and I do say break the game, I don't think it's going to break the game, but I can see the pathway that led to we have to be very cautious with this card, and it's Reverberations. I kind of skipped over it when I talked about all the shadow spells before. If you reverberate a Kiara the Dark Star, I believe the way the spell burst will work is it triggers after the spell is cast. So I think Reverberations will copy Kiara, and then the spell burst will go off on both Kiaras at the same time, and you will steal 4 health. Then if you play another Reverberations on a Kiara, the same thing will happen. You will copy another Kiara, and then all 3 spell bursts will go off, and you will steal 6 health. Quick maths, that means you're going to steal 10 health. Now that doesn't sound that impressive. However, you have created a board state that means that if you do 5 more shadow spells, you will OTK an opponent, assuming they haven't got more than 10 health in minions on the board. It's a bit more hand-wave the equation to that because, you know, it does split as 2 damage, sorry, not 1 damage, so it's not an exact mathematics on that, depending on odd numbers of health minions. So, I don't think it's realistically going to be an OTK. And you might also be pointing out to me right now, you have 1 more mana. Yes, you are true. You've spent 9 mana doing this. You have 1 mana to cast 5 shadow spells, which is pretty hard when there are no 0 mana shadow spells right now. But, what if instead you also do Clearance Promoter into Summoner Dark Marrow, and you discount 2 of the spells in your hands, including some of the other shadow spells that you might put in your deck, in total by 4 mana discount? Then that takes you to a situation where you have effectively got 14 mana, and that takes you into the realm where if your opponent has less than 40 health in total on the board, they will get killed by Kiara, Reverberation, and the 4 mana discounted shadow spells along the way. And I think this is why they had to be so careful with Kiara. I think the effect is generally speaking weak, and by the way, I think this combo is actually just nonsensical. It's such a huge tempo loss. Firstly, to do Clearance Promoter onto Summoner Dark Marrow. It's a 7 mana Summoner 4/4 combo. That is hot trash. But yeah, maybe you can do some sort of meme deck with there. If you can get to the situation then as well where you draw the reverberations, and the shadow spells with discounts, yeah, you can OTK, but again, it's very specific when your opponent not having more than 40 health. The set is Starships. Most of the Starships have big health totals, so I think this deck has got so many different ways you could play around it that it's not reasonable to expect this to actually function in any way, shape, or form. But I honestly think that if it weren't for Reverberations, Kiara probably would have had a higher steal amount on it. But because Reverberations exist, and because this is always going to exist in Wild, this card can't realistically be buffed on the effect, because the math changes dramatically very quickly if you turn it to 3, because then you're stealing 6 and then 9, which is 15, and that's quite a lot of health to steal for 9 mana even. There are other things you can do in the process of this, because you have to bear in mind that when you're doing all of this combo setting up, you are getting health from the Kiaras, but you've obviously turned them into reverberated, like echoes, or whatever you want to call it, that die after taking 1 damage, which isn't very bueno. You could try and set up a Dorian play with Kiara and turn one of them to a 1/1 copy, and cover artist a Kiara as well, in which case you then also do get the health effectively onto your minions, and they won't just pop immediately. However, you're spending more mana on the minions then rather than the spell combo. You're spending 2 more mana in total for just Cover Artist and Dorian. And that's not really a great deal. Also, you have some issues with Dorian of like how to choose for Kiara specifically to get the Dorian effect. I think that's just a complete pipe dream. One final thing I'm going to mention as well. Kiara obviously synergizes with Sketch Artist as well to give you temporary copies of Shadow Spells, so you can cast more Shadow Spells on your turn to get Kiara's effect off. I think unrealistically you're going to be playing Sketch Artist, Kiara. I think it's unrealistically you're going to get the summon copies of Kiara with Sketch Artist combo going off because it just requires too much mana that Warlock can't really get to. So I think this is going to be a scenario where you play 1 copy of Kiara, you play Sketch Artist, draw a cheap Shadow Spell, and you can play the temporary copy on your Sketch Artist or in Kiara. You buff the Kiara, and you just try and take it out of range of someone being able to destroy it. I will say, though, because of the existence of spaceships, I think single target hard removal is going to be fairly strong this set, so I think Kiara is going to have some issues. Anyway, this is the whole demon package. I've actually not included Kiara on this because I don't think it's going to see any play. So you've got Foreboding Flame, you have Archimon, Black Hole, Kil'jaeden, and Infernal Stratagem. And then you want to generate demons for the payoff for Archimon and Foreboding Flame. And you're going to be generating those cards with Abduction Ray, Demonic Studies, Demonic Dynamics, Relentless Wrathguard. Mixologist can also generate you demons from the potions. I've added that on there. I've put Dorian as well as a potential because Dorian can always work with the button to generate you another demon. But I'm not sure Dorian would necessarily see play in that deck. I will say when I made this slide, it was before I had some other additional knowledge. And that's because it has been confirmed that Demonic Dynamics is going to be buffed before the start of the next set, and there's going to be a patch. It's actually going to get a 1 mana reduction. Before I saw this, I was like, I don't think this demon package is actually going to work. I don't see the reason why you would play the demon package and not just play Kil'jaeden in a control deck. And I still somewhat am of that thought process that I don't know if Archimon is a big enough payoff, because I feel like Archimon at the end of the day is going to have an effect very similar to, oh my god, the Death Knight card, which is a 9 mana spell that casts a bunch of random undead onto the board. It feels very similar to that, because you have to summon the demons, you can't just do it off, sorry, you have to play the demons, not summon the demons to get the effect of Archimon, which means you have to spend all of that mana along the way. You're probably not going to be able to be, like, picky enough to not play some weak demons, especially since you're rewarded for playing the weaker demons, or lower mana cost demons, I suppose, because you want to Infernal Stratagem them. It's just, I don't see the full package working together versus just playing hard control, or like a harder version of a zoo type deck, and then just putting Kil'jaeden in the deck. So yeah, I'm not convinced this is going to work. By the way, other reasons why I'm not sure this would work together is if Kil'jaeden ends up being such an incredible card as like a finisher type thing for an aggro type deck, I say a finisher, just an extender for an aggro deck, if it's in control decks and becomes an important card, you're probably going to want to tutor for it, because especially in the control v control matchup, you want to play this as soon as possible. The best tutor probably for Kil'jaeden right now is Talon, because you don't have to bastardize your deck too much to not put a minion that costs more than Kil'jaeden in your deck. It's pretty bad because you're going to miss out on stuff like Yogg, for example, and probably Unkiliax, let's be real. The other issue, though, is if you really want your Kil'jaeden via Talon, you're going to have to lose Archimon. It's a 7 mana minion, and you probably don't want Archimon over Kil'jaeden for the most part in a lot of decks. So that is a bit of a bad news bears combo, or lack of combo, in fact. What I will say, though, and I think there will be a world, in fact, where all of these decks exist. There's going to be a Kil'jaeden aggro deck, there's going to be a mid-range deck, there's going to be a control deck. It's going to be the 3 little bears with Kil'jaeden, I think. One really nice card that works well with him is Mass Production. You can just play a shit ton of copies of Mass Production. The downside of this card is you're putting Detritus in your deck, and eventually turn your deck into Mass Productions. But that's fine with Kil'jaeden, as long as you draw the Kil'jaeden in your initial mass production of cards. You can also be pushing the button during all of this and just keep drawing cards. As long as you draw Kil'jaeden, he will always just wipe away your sins for playing mass productions like times 9 during the course of the game. He'll wipe away your sins, he will obliterate them and just turn them all into happy demons instead. So, because of this, I think you probably won't do Talon to Kil'jaeden, in which case they will leave a room for a bit of an Archimon play, because it is a pretty big potential tempo turn, a big value turn, so maybe we will see this Kil'jaeden Archimon combo in like the control decks. I'd also say overplanning is a pretty good way of doing this. By the way, just as a side note, overplanning is getting its effect changed, but it's going to be the same effect. You might be saying, are you stupid? No. Well, yes, but no. So Discover is getting removed off overplanning. It's going to be changed to choose instead. It's going to say choose 3 cards. Because of the interaction with Overplanner and the one-drop Hunter card that copies discovered cards, it combined with Overplanner would give you 3 copies of the Overplanner chosen cards. That's deemed to be too strong, so they're changing Overplanner to be choose. Otherwise, it will function identically before. It's just to stop that interaction from working. But anyway, that could go into some sort of control deck to try and find the Kill Giant faster, to play it early so you can beat the other control decks. Finally, Handlock could be a thing again. You could get a big hand of cards, Gaslight Gatekeeper the big hand if you don't have Kill Giant, and it gives you a pretty good opportunity. If you're cycling 9 cards back into your deck, and you've played like 5 or so turns, there's a pretty good chance of the 9 cards you redraw, you're going to hit Kill Giant. And also one of the nice things about this, and I don't normally do this, but I put together like the backbone of some sort of like Handlock type of deck, because I can see a world where this synergizes pretty nicely together. If you're playing cards that are net neutral, so like, minions that discover a card, or a spell that discovers 2 cards, for example, as long as you go neutral on the cards, your hand is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as you draw cards each turn. So there is a natural synergy between discovering demons and playing Handlock. So I see a world where like this backbone of a Handlock deck with like Mass Production in it, Defile, just typical great control cards to live through the early game. And you get payoffs along with, like, Kill Giant, which, by the way, I've not put the 10 new cards on this list yet because, they're not in the card library yet for the construction side of things, but you can get these payoffs of Dark Alley Pact of making lots of big hands. You can get Mountain Giant payoffs. You can then get the payoffs via Archimon once you've played these big cards. Another way I didn't mention as well to get Kill Giant out early is Loken. As long as you don't play too many minions in your deck, Loken's going to be a pretty good way of finding Kill Giant as well. You can throw Marin in the deck as well, some more value. Sargeras in the deck for more control. And actually, when I look at this deck all in all, I can see this to some degree working. I don't think this is necessarily going to be all the cards you'll put into this list. I mean, you obviously won't be because there's only 20 here, but I don't even think you'll necessarily put all of this backbone in. I actually put 1 Forge of Wills on this because I don't think that would actually make the cut of the final list. And there's some other things that maybe if you went more minion focused, you would actually drop Loken because you're unlikely to hit Kill Giant. And you would run some other stuff instead. But I do like the idea of this Handlock deck, and I think it might be a thing. Do I think it's going to be tier 1? No, but I see a world now where this could possibly work. Alright, let's go away from demons for some time now, at least until the star ratings. We have another spell for other support. It is Hearthstone, 0 mana Fel spell with tradable. Restore all damage your hero has taken this turn. Oh, alright. Every time a 0 mana spell is printed in Hearthstone, not quite every time, but it feels like it breaks the game in some way. And I think this spell will break the game in some way. The obvious first thought of this is, oh, Pain Warlock will enjoy this, right? Because you can play your Malefic Rook, it hits you in the face, for example, and you can just play your Healstone for 0 and make it go away. And you effectively played a free 3 mana 5/6. It's not quite truly free because you lost another card in the process, aka the Hearthstone. So it's more like you played 3 mana 5/6, discard a card, which is, a pretty good effect. But as I mentioned before, Warlocks are sick fucks of a deck. And I actually want to take the pain because they have stuff like Molten Giant in the deck. And if you're actually looking to pain Warlock, the only 2 cards they really run for stabilization are Infernal and Popguard the Putrid. They don't run, for example, Felstring Harp, so I think because they don't run the Harp, they're probably not going to run the Healstone either. They want to play this fine line between, living and dying. They're just auto-asphyxiating, you know the idea. They're doing that. And if they can do that successfully, they win. Yeah, that's the way they win. However, there is another deck that does take a lot of damage, and they do use stuff like Felstring Harp to protect themselves, and it's where I think the Hearthstone is going to go. And that is the Fatigue Insanity Warlock package. That deck takes a lot of damage in the form of fatigue damage. They keep trying to play these Baritone Imps, the Encroaching Insanities. In fact, especially Encroaching Insanity does a lot of damage. Creates Conductors and Crescendos. And the idea is that you play more cards to heal you than your opponent can play in their deck, and effectively die to the fatigue damage eventually from the Encroaching Insanity. What if you play like your Encroaching Insanity, which is like, let's say it does 8 damage in total, and then you just put a Hearthstone on top of it, and you just make it go away? That is really, really powerful. So I definitely see a world where that goes into this deck. And one of the nice things about this as well, I didn't really mention it yet, it's tradable. So if you draw this super early, you're like, okay, I don't want this right now because the fatigue damage I'm taking, I don't care about it. It's so minor, who cares? You can trade this back into your deck and try and get one of these Imps, one of the Conductors, the Crescendos, because that's actually one of the big weaknesses of Insanity Warlock, which, by the way, is a really strong deck and we're seeing some play in the most recent Master Stores. One of the weaknesses is not drawing your fatigue cards, in which case this deck, as you can imagine, gets very, very clunky. One of the other things they also try to do with this deck is use Tidepool Pupil to generate more copies of the fatigue cards. And actually, Hearthstone is pretty useful for that as well, because you have to cast 3 spells to get back a Crescendo or Encroaching Insanity. And actually, that was quite difficult sometimes for this deck to cast 3 separate spells. What better than Hearthstone? You just play it as a 0-mana spell, it fills one of the Tidepool slots, and when you discover a card, you pick the Crescendo instead. It lets you get the Tidepool stuff out faster than you otherwise would get it. So I really like this card. I think it's going to see play in a very top-end deck as well. Now, I don't like to do wild stuff because I don't play wild, but everyone has been shitting, pooping, pissing, all that type of jazz at Hearthstone because of a card called Dark Glare, and more widely speaking, an archetype called Demon Seed Warlock, where I believe Hearthstone is about to break wild again. Honestly, anytime Warlock gets any card that is like related to pain type packages, wild just goes into a frenzy. If you weren't aware, the Demon Seed was an old questline where you had to take damage to your own hero, and eventually the reward was Blightborn Tamsin, which meant that any damage that you took went to your opponent. And the idea was you draw through your entire deck, taking the self-damage along the way, and then the fatigue damage would be dealt to your opponent, and you would basically just win the game from there by just drawing endless amounts of cards. One of the big cards that enables this is Dark Glare. I kind of mentioned this with the Sick Fuck Pain Warlock package that we have in Standard. They tried to play this fine line between taking a lot of damage and actually staying alive. And Dark Glare let you play lots and lots of cards, but on the downside you took a lot of damage, which was also an upside for this deck because of the Demon Seed. But it was a downside if you went against an aggro deck, because an aggro deck might just smoke you while you're doing your Dark Glare shenanigans. What if you do your Dark Glare shenanigans and then you just play a Hearthstone at the end of it? You're still taking the damage, and unlike the Pain deck where you really wanted to be at very low health, as I understand it, the wild version of this deck just wants you to take the increments of damage. You don't really care at what your health ends up at. You're happy just to complete the quest at 30 health, it doesn't matter. So, yeah, there is a concern that Dark Glare and Hearthstone is going to break wild, but honestly, I don't care, I don't play wild. But if you do play wild, then watch out for this combo wombo. Alright, now reluctantly, I have to get into the part of the episode again where I have to ask myself, do I believe in UFOs? And I come to the conclusion that I don't think I can believe in these UFOs necessarily. Fellfire Thrusters, 3 mana 2/3, Starship Piece minion. Spellburst, deal this minion's attack damage to 2 random enemy minions. Okay, well, we have had Spellburst deal damage in the past. It was on Firebrand. Firebrand didn't see that much play, but I remember having a lot of hype about it. It was a bit unfortunate, though, on Firebrand, because it was around the time that there was a no minion mage package for the first time, and eventually one set later in Madness of the Dark Moon Fair, Deck of Lunacy was printed, and with that and, what was it called? Incanter's Flow, kind of just broke the game for a time being, but that deck had no minions in it, which meant that if you're a minion in Mage back in 2019, I think it was, or thereabouts, it was a pretty bad time for you to see any play. So I don't think it was that Firebrand was necessarily bad, but it didn't see a lot of play in the end. I will say Firebrand is just better than Fellfire Thrusters in almost every conceivable way. You do 4 damage in both of the cards. Firebrand is split as 1 intervals. Thrusters is split as 2. You normally want your damage split up in the finest units so that you can potentially kill efficiently opposing minions. Also, Firebrand is a 3/4. Felfire Thrusters are 2/3. They both cost the same amount of mana, so you're losing 1/1 stat line, getting a weaker effect on the spell burst. It's all bad news. Now, you will point out that obviously it isn't quite that true, because if you can buff the attack of Felfire Thrusters, you get an effect that is better than Firebrand. And obviously that is the intention of this card. You're meant to use it with stuff like Monstrous Form, or Cursed Souvenir, for example. You turn it into a 5/6, and it does 5 damage to 2 random enemy minions. Obviously that's pretty good. I will say with Monstrous Form, though, it is effectively only a temporary buff on the card, and normally you want Monstrous Form to be used on a card that can attack on the turn it's played. Which you can't do with Felfire Thrusters if you just instantly play it and Spellburst it. And you're not going to have Felfire Thrusters live over a course of a turn to Spellburst it on a future turn. So if you do this as a turn 4 play, for example, you just play Felfire Thrusters, it's a tongue twister, and Monstrous Form, you've effectively played 4 mana 2/3, deal 5 damage to 2 random enemy minions. Is that good enough to see play in Standard, becomes my question. And actually, as I was thinking about it, I was like, maybe. It really depends on the meta, so to speak. Because obviously, if you're just hitting 1/1s, who cares about the +3 damage? And actually, there's quite a lot of aggro decks right now are more tokeny, so you don't need that super high damage value. So I actually think this is a fairly weak combo. Cursed Souvenir at least gives you the guarantee. Sorry, it gives you the +3/+3 permanently. But you are taking 3 damage every single turn. I'd also say there are not a lot of other good ways to buff Felfire Thrusters with spells that aren't just, 3 mana 3/3, which is not a great value. There are some minion ways of doing it. You could use Saloon Brewmaster if you're a complete psychopath to refresh the spell burst so you could do it again on a future turn. Not worth it, too slow, not cheaty enough. You could also use Escape Pod to rush into another minion, die, give this +1/+1, and then spell burst after. But the key issue of all of this is you still have to spell burst the card to get an effect. And this sort of gets me to the... Actually, you know what? We'll look at the other Starship piece before I get to the problem again of the UFOs. The other one we've seen is Heart of the Legion. 2 mana 3/2 Lifesteal Starship piece. Oh my god, have you seen this power creep? This is Vile Thing with 1 more attack. In 5 years, we've put 1 more attack on a 2 mana 5-stat Lifesteal minion? Oh. Disgusting. No, obviously it's not disgusting. This is hot trash in Standard. Actually, even in Arena, I think this would be pretty weak as cards go by. 2 mana 2/3 with a stat line, or 3/2 with a stat line, isn't really good enough anymore. I will also say on Vile Fiend's behalf, it has a tribe on it. And Demon Tribe normally has some sort of buffing-like effect, at least existing in the game of Hearthstone. Heart of the Legion didn't even have that going for it. It doesn't have a tribe on it. So, this is really, ultimate detritus of a card. And this kind of fits in with the whole Starship Enterprise idea. By the way, the Starship for the Warlock is going to be called the Nether's Eye. But that's by the by. Still, the effect of the Starship will be the combinership of all the pieces that you use to build it. Every single piece we've seen so far, not just in Warlock, but also in Hunter... Actually, with one exception, the one Druid exception is slightly different, but they've all been understated cards, and almost all of them have had some sort of anti-aggro tool teched onto it. And I actually got thinking about this, of other things this reminded me of. It reminded me a bit of Cthulhu, the Shattered, as I mentioned, but actually I think the closest comparison to this is actually Galakron with the evocation mechanic, where you'd play your evocations over the course of a game, and as you play the evocations, for every 2 you played, you would improve Galakron, which eventually meant when you played the big card Galakron, you would get a more powerful effect than if you had played none of the evocations. During the process of doing that, though, the evocations gave you an additional effect, and indeed, all of those were understated cards. However, the evocations on Galakron all felt like they were more proactive, or at least they gave you a bit more value than the cards we've seen so far from the Starship pieces. Most of the Starship pieces so far seem to just be if your opponent has a minion, fuck them. That is the idea of it. Or if your opponent is trying to play lots of minions quickly, fuck them in the case of Arcanite Defense Crystal. None of them are really good proactively. If you're going into a control deck as this Starship type deck, and you have Spellburst deal this means attack damage to random enemy minions, they're laughing at you. They're honestly just laughing at you. You've played 3 mana for a 2/3. 3 mana. That's going to be the control players, because that's not a threat to them. They just don't care about it. They want to get into the later game and do really, really disgusting, cheaty things. And I just don't think any of these cards are cheaty enough. Sure, eventually when you put the Starship together, the Starship Enterprise, if you've been lucky and you've got your Starships all up and ready by turn 5, and you can, curve this into 2, 3, 4, launch the button on 5 as long as they all die as well. On turn 5, you're getting a 8, 9, with Spell Burst, deal this minion's attack damage to 2 random enemy minions. It has Lifesteal on it, and it has Taunt Death Rattle, and gain 6 armor, which, by the way, is, again, to aggro decks is really what it is. If you played this and you launched the Starship on 5 and you're against an aggro deck, you win the game. You instantly win the game, because you get Lifesteal on the Spell Burst damage. It does require you to Spell Burst, I will say that, but assuming you Spell Burst as well, you're going to get 16 health back. You're going to eventually get 6 armor from the Arcanite Defense Crystal. Aggro decks it's basically going back to full health again, and aggro decks would not like that, so great. The UFOs, the Starships, seem to just be big anti-aggro decks, and I do appreciate that is somewhat what the community asked for, but maybe the community should be really careful what they wish for, because this is going to push the game into some, seriously greedy control decks, very long-lasting games, is my prediction. I will say on one of the advantages of the Warlock version of this compared to the Hunter, for example, there is actually some really cheaty stuff you can do as well once you've launched the ship. You can Forge of Wills the ship, so at least you can rush some stat line into opposing minions. And one of my big downsides of the Starship so far is that playing one big stat line card isn't really good enough in Hearthstone anymore, in my opinion. There's so much good hard removal that it just simply doesn't matter. If you start putting 2 or 3 big guys on the board, then you start to get into the realms of, okay, there are definitely some mid-range decks which would struggle to remove this. So I see a world where you do the Starship Enterprise deck with Forge of Wills. Also, as we kind of alluded to before, reverberations exist. If you reverberate your Starship with the Heart of the Legion, Felfire Thrusters, and Arcanite Defense Crystal in it, you get the Spell Burst off twice. So you're going to be doing, in total, 24 damage to minion splitters, 4 separate... Wait, that's not good maths. That's really bad maths. You do 32 damage, split as 8 damage intervals to presumably 4 different minions, and you heal for 32, which is effectively a full heal. I will say, you jump through all of these hoops playing all these crap minions, taking all these crap tempo turn plays to push 5 mana to summon this godforsaken thing, and then you suddenly turn it into something that dies after it takes 1 damage. Not a great idea, though that might be an indication of why you might want to play Dimensional Core in that deck, because then at least it is protected from 1 first hit from the reverberation, so maybe you do reverberations on one of these starships. The other thing you could do on a starship is Cursed Campaign it. This is the card that sees absolutely no play right now. But maybe if you got a big enough minion with a big enough Death Rattle, with a big enough lifesteal associated with it, so that every time that it came onto the board, you effectively healed back to full. Maybe Cursed Campaign is good enough. Maybe you can wait for those 2 turns of dormancy to get it back just to heal back to full again. So maybe this is going to work. I actually think there's more likelihood that this works than the Hunter one works, but I just think that Warlock can do more disgusting things than this. I just don't see how Insanity Warlock wouldn't just laugh at this. I don't see how Control Warlock wouldn't just laugh at this, but we'll see when the full set comes out. I will say as the final card for Warlock. This is Bad Omen, 6 mana Fell spell. In 2 turns, summon a 2/6/6 demons with Taunt. If you're building a starship, summon them now. Okay, as I was saying, I will say in terms of the starship deck, this is actually a pretty big payoff for doing starship stuff. If you can get the faster acting effect, aka if you can have a starship on the board, this is a really strong effect. It's 6 mana for 12 stats with Taunt. Kind of reminds me of Oasis Surger, where you used to go down a quest line that would give you both choose one effects in time for turn 5, in which case you would play 5 mana, 10/10 in stats, split up as 2 5/5s, and they would have Rush. Normally, I would say through the annals of history of Hearthstone, you want Rush over Taunt. There are some, obviously interactions where you want the reverse, but typically you're rewarded for proactive decisions rather than reactive, and Taunt is more reactive than proactive. So I think this Oasis Surger play was better than the Bad Omen play, but it's still, Bad Omen's pretty good. If you wait the 2 turns for it, though, by the way, it is actually hot trash, so you're really like, I need to be building a starship right now. On the plus side for this, though, there's a pretty good chance by turn 6 you will be building some sort of starship. All of the pieces are cheaper than 6 that we've seen so far. And assuming you run... I mean, currently I'm thinking you're going to be running 6 copies of the card in the deck, which means that every single 5 cards you're going to get a starship piece, which means if you mulligan and draw a few cards, the big odd chances is that you will have found one of your starship pieces at the very least. Then all you need to do is have it die to use Bad Omen. So there's a pretty good chance that you're never ever going to see the in 2 turns effect on this card, other than if you happen to generate it in another deck without a starship in it. Anyway, that is the Warlock cards. I'm a little bit on the fence about them because I think Kil'jaeden's the best Warlock card, and it's not actually a Warlock card, it's a neutral card. But I'm going to definitely try and make this Demon package work. I think it's going to have a lot of complexity about the deck creation mechanics. There's a lot of stuff you could do with it, a lot of different speeds you could set your deck at. So I'm actually really looking forward to that. And honestly, I kind of like the idea of more mid-rangey decks. And I certainly do see the building blocks of some sort of mid-rangey deck. So I am looking forward to this deck as one of the opening day decks so far. Do I think it's going to be particularly strong? I'm not sure just yet. Anyway, that'll do it for the Warlock reveals. I think tomorrow is Mage. Split them into many different time slots, but I'll do another one of these tomorrow for Mage. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, comment, subscribe. Everything helps me out. I'll see you next time. Bye.